You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Colorado. This is the Engage the Rockies podcast. I am your host, Jarvis Caldwell. Today, we have a very special episode for you with a returning guest. Now, over the last few months, we've kind of touched on here and there different ballot initiatives that you may or may not see come this November. I think early on we had Michael Fields on, and he'd mentioned some ballot initiatives that Advanced Colorado were working on, and some of those made it onto the ballot, and we may bring him back to talk about it. Last week, we brought you the 14 statewide ballot measures that the Secretary of State certified that will be on your ballot. And depending on where you live at, there may be a few more ballot issues that you weren't aware of that are not on the statewide ballot. And so something else that was teased the last time our current guest today was on, Ms. Kelly Caufield, was that the Common Sense Institute was working on an analysis of some of these ballot measures. And so their new report is out on their website. And so Kelly was nice enough to take the time to join Engage and talk about this analysis because she is one of the authors on it and one of the researchers that worked on this. So I'm just going to give her a brief introduction and then we'll jump right into it. So Kelly is the executive director of the Common Sense Institute. Common Sense Institute is a nonpartisan research organization dedicated to the protection and promotion of Colorado's economy. CSI's mission is to examine the fiscal impacts of policies, initiatives, and proposed laws so that Coloradans are educated and informed on issues impacting their lives. And the specific thing we're going to be talking about today is the Common Sense Institute's 2024 ballot guide, and it highlights the potential economic and fiscal impacts of key ballot measures in Colorado. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us again.
Of course. Thank you, Jarvis.
Absolutely. So we at Engage are very big fans of the Common Sense Institute. You guys do the really hard and tedious research, and then organizations like Engage try to bring that information to the citizens and the voters. Something I like to say, just to make sure that I get that out there, is Engage is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit. So for our listeners there, we are not advocating one way or the other, whether you vote yes or vote no on these issues. We're just going to go through an analysis of it. And CSI was awesome enough to do the research and then talk to us about it. So thank you again, Kelly, for coming today.
Of course. I'm excited to jump in, Jarvis. And
Absolutely.
This ballot, this election season, there's really not a large statewide tax to vote on this year. It's more about issues impacting the family household, school choice, public safety, housing, and impacts to the Western way of life. So it's an interesting year.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's get right into it. Proposition 127. This measure would ban the intentional killing, wounding, pursuing, or entrapping of mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx. Kelly, I'll let you take it from there and kind of give us your analysis of it. I have the some of the numbers here too. So interested to hear what your take on this or what CSI's analysis was.
Yes, thanks, Jarvis. I have to say, of all of the measures that we've studied, and it's a lot, we're nearing 10 different ballot measures. This analysis is the one that's generated the most media and policymaker interest. Mm-hmm. So big cat hunting ban, Proposition 127, would ban the intentional killing, wounding, or pursuing of mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx. So like any analysis, CSI tries to find the numbers. We try to educate the voters on what would the economic impact be of a measure. Now, the state did produce an analysis, an estimate of the impact to Colorado, and they show a somewhat small amount, all things considered. They showed about a $400,000 loss in a decreased number of hunting licenses that CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, would expect if this measure passed. So on first glance, that does not feel like a big impact to the fiscal sheet. So like usual, Common Sense, we do deeper digging and we try to understand what's that long-term impact. And we were able to model our analysis based on other states like California that have looked at measures like this. And we found that to do a full dynamic impact of this measure,
Hmm.
you need to not just look at mountain lion licenses, but you need to look at the animals that they eat.
Hmm.
Because, if you want to account for that full impact, we should also look at the lost elk and mule deer permit revenue that would be affected by what would be expected a pretty large increase in mountain lions. If you prohibit the hunting, we'd expect that population to increase. And if they are increased, the animals that they eat will decrease. So
Hmm.
when we account for the decline in mountain lion, bobcat, deer, and elk hunting, that is a bigger impact to the economy. We're looking at about a $61.6 million impact in lost economic output.
Hmm.
That's looking at lost tourism dollars. That's looking at those decreased revenue and licenses across the populations impacted.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you guys dove deep into that because when I read that original the state's fiscal analysis, like you said, they estimated 410,000,
Yep.
and like you said, when you're talking the state has a 40 something billion-dollar budget a year, 410,000 doesn't sound like that much, but the reality is that it's not just about the hunting license. You mentioned tourism. That's a gigantic one. I don't know all the hunting laws around here, but I know a lot of people who travel to different states to go hunting. And when you remove that element, then all of a sudden the tourism dollars get affected. Now, also something that comes to mind is if you're not hunting mountain lions or lynx or bobcats, then I think there's an issue of livestock there, right? Because the more mountain lions you have, then the more threat to people's livestock. So I don't know if you all took that into account, but I did see something mentioned about livestock in there.
That's right. I think, it's an important aspect to know. I have two small kids. I certainly don't want our mountain lion population greatly escalating. And for
Mhm.
ranchers and those who really depend on the land and the safety and expansion of their livestock, this is a true issue. I mean, current
Yeah,
state costs related to compensating Coloradans for mountain lion attacks on livestock and other property damage would shift to landowners,
right.
as the measure would remove mountain lions from the definition of big game. Right now, there is allowed, that kind of hunting to protect your household, to protect your animals. And with this prohibition, we believe that would be lost. So I don't have the actual economic output
Hmm.
of what number that would create, Jarvis, but it's
Yeah,
a maybe an unintended consequence that voters should understand.
yeah, absolutely. And like you said at the beginning of this for Proposition 127, this is I noticed you all put it first in your report, and honestly, just from my scrolling on Instagram and X.com and Facebook and stuff, this is the most talked about ballot measure that I've seen so far. And maybe I'm in an echo chamber because I know a lot of hunters, but it feels to me like this is the most talked about ballot initiative out of all of them. Okay, let's move on to Amendment 80. So, Amendment 80 would enshrine school choice in the state constitution, ensuring student access to options such as charter schools. So, you all did an analysis on this. I noticed there wasn't so much of a dollar amount, right? Because I think that's kind of it's more about just giving school choice and making sure that it's a right. If you want to expand on it.
Sure. So for this measure, you're right. This is a somewhat simple change, if that's possible, to the
Hmm.
Constitution, saying that school choice is really enshrined in the Constitution, that students and parents deserve access to a quality education, and that's broadly defined
Right.
as any school the student is wishing to pursue, charter schools, open enrollment options, including additional innovation opportunities. So this could
Hmm.
potentially open the door for greater school choice, even outside of a charter school environment. We don't currently have any education savings accounts authorized like some of our other states. Common Sense
Right.
Institute, Arizona. In Arizona, ESA's education savings accounts, a real tool that families are using to increase
Hmm.
access to both public and private schools. So we don't have that in Colorado. So for our report that we issued as a part of this ballot guide, we looked at where we do have data, and that's charter schools. I think,
Right.
as you know, Jarvis, Colorado has a very rich ecosystem of charter schools. We've had charter schools authorized here in our state before many other states. So in 93, the state law really opened the door to authorizing charter schools. So we dove deep in the data there, which shows the outcomes on academic proficiency surpasses traditional schools. At every grade, you have that standardized testing in grades 3 through 8 in math and in literacy. So we educate the reader on the benefits of charter schools. They are not perfect. I'll be honest, all schools in Colorado have a long way to go to meet the proficiency expectations so students can be ready for a post-secondary credential and for the workforce. I think interestingly enough, though, the data point that was unique to this report that really encouraged your viewers to listen to and check out more is the post-secondary attainment. And Jarvis, I'm not just talking about 4-year degrees. I'm talking about anything after high school, technical certificate, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. Students graduating from charter high schools in Colorado have a significantly higher post-secondary attainment rate. They not only graduate from high school, and they not only walk into the doors of a post-secondary setting, they are more likely to complete the credential. 42% more likely to complete that credential than 33% for our non-charter high school students. Why is that a big deal? It just shows that the benefits of that school environment in a charter school stayed with that student, helped them persist, and helped them complete the credential, which we all know, based on the economics, leads to greater economic success and prosperity.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anybody listening to this, I definitely recommend reading your actual report. And it doesn't take long. I've read it a couple of times there. It didn't take too long, but you do have those statistics, and it is very kind of eye opening. And I think in general, or in particular, students of color benefit exponentially thanks to charter schools as well. And your report really breaks down the numbers on that. It's very interesting to see. Okay, Proposition 130. Proposition 130 appropriates a one-time $350 million appropriation from the state general fund to pay for a newly created peace officer training and support fund within the Department of Public Safety for the purposes of recruiting, training, and supporting police officers and their families. Okay, one time $350 million being allocated for peace officer training and support. You all have a very interesting analysis on this about crime rates and funding, and I'd like to hear your analysis on it.
Thanks. So our public safety fellow, phenomenal man and leader here in Colorado, Paul Pazin, he's the former Denver police chief. So he is our fellow. This was a report that he appropriately analyzed and wanted to share the best data on it. Again, similar to you all, Jarvis, common sense does not endorse issues. We do not take positions on ballot measures, on legislation. We are doing our best to just focus on the facts and the data. So we were really interested in law enforcement numbers and crime rate. So in Chief Pazin's report, which you can find in our ballot guide on our website, he found that the share of Colorado's law enforcement employees who are actually police officers shrank from 69% in 2013 to 65% in 2023. So not a drastic change, but that is a decreasing trend that's important for us to keep our eye on. So what that means is fewer police officers with arresting authority, boots on the ground. The police departments appear to be employing more people that might be supporting individuals in other ways. So mental health supports, addiction liaisons. It's unclear exactly what these FTEs are, but they are not police officers with arresting authority. So I believe the proponents of this measure saw a bit of a gap and wanted to see more actual, police officers with that boots on the ground ability. And the reason I think there's an interest in that is when we go deep on the data, and we love comparing, contrasting Denver, Colorado Springs, and Aurora. I just think that's where we learn our most interesting trends and lessons where we can. Yeah. We did a report last year that showed in Denver, law enforcement numbers were decreasing while crime was increasing. So not
Right.
surprising. I live in Denver. I see that. I've had items stolen from my property. Property crime is an all-time high in our state. It's a huge challenge in the Denver metro. But to contrast, in Colorado Springs, and no city's perfect, springs aren't perfect, but
Right.
we're again trying to compare and contrast where we can. The crime rate in the Springs did decrease by about 16% over 10 years from 2010 to 2022, while the number of police officers in Colorado Springs rose by 6%. So
Right.
you are seeing a city that's made different decisions. And as of now, looking at the data, the outcomes speak pretty clearly for that.
Yeah, and from that same report there, so that was the Colorado Springs numbers, like you said, crime rate decreased by 16%, 15.9% from 2010 to 2022. But the police officers went up almost 6%, right? So
Right.
police officers are going up, crime's going down. I mean, kind of crazy to think, right? But for Denver specifically, I mean, I was kind of blown away when I saw these numbers, but from 2010 to 2022, the crime rate in Denver rose 32%. However, the actual uniformed police officers declined 15%. So, I mean, a 15% decline is pretty incredible, especially considering these are numbers from 2010 to 2022. Well, Denver has grown, I'm sure, since 2010. So
Yep.
Denver's growing, more population, you're losing police officers, and crime is going up, I mean, pretty exponentially. And then Colorado Springs almost seems like it's the exact opposite case. So, yeah, so more funding for the police officers, it looks like Proposition 130 would do. And so it'll be interesting to see it one time. I don't know what happens. I've read the ballot initiative. It's a one-time $350 million. I'm not sure how long they plan for that $350 million to last, but I guess if they project it for maybe 10 years or something like that, then it'll be interesting to see. CSI could come back in, do an analysis if it were to pass when the money's running out, and say, hey, how did this actually benefit recruiting and retaining and things like that, to see if it actually worked or not, if it passes, right?
That's right. That's right. And it's a lot of this would be left up to the administration to implement. The ballot
Right.
measure gives some parameters, but other components would be decided by the administration. And the legislature could always decide to, permanently authorize this,
Right.
if results are promising and good for the state.
For sure. Okay, let's talk about some initiatives that are specifically to Denver. A lot of our listeners do live in Denver, and these are financial ones that will definitely affect you. And I think as far as sales tax go, even if you don't live in Denver, if you're visiting Denver, this will affect you. So the first one up is the Denver Health Sales Tax. So this looks like they're proposing a citywide 0.34% sales tax and use tax. And you guys had an analysis on this as far as what it would actually, like, why does Denver Health need this, and then what it would cost.
Yes, Denver Health is not that far from my house, so I pass it every day, and really appreciate their leader, Donna Lynn. I think she's a very strong leader for our state. So what this measure would do is an increase sales tax of 0.34%. It would generate about $70 million in revenue. And according to the proponents, the reason this is needed is because Denver Health really is taking care of many populations that are expanding in the Denver metro area, namely the homeless population, which is pretty substantial here in Denver, as well as migrants. The migrant numbers have been decreasing, Jarvis, in the last few months, but we've had a challenge of an influx of migrants really since November of 22 is when it first started. So we've seen, dips and peaks, but again, Denver Health is the primary hospital taking care of those who do not have insurance. And they are showing that the city has flat funded them for the last 10 years at about $30 million. So Denver Health is going after this amount of money, 70 million, to pay for their uncompensated care costs for these populations. So it's
Right.
definitely worth a read and trying to better understand the impacts. Like any tax measure, though, our analysis does show when you raise taxes, that does impact often jobs and GDP of the Denver metro area. It would also, if the other sales tax measure passes, which I'm happy to jump to, if both of these sales tax measures increase, Denver will have the highest sales tax along the Front Range, which is tough. And, I think makes us decrease in our competitiveness to other cities where people might want to do their shopping and tourism.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's perfect. Let's go ahead and segue into the affordable housing Denver sales tax. It says
Great.
it says the Denver City Council and Mayor's Administration are proposing a citywide 0.5% sales and use tax. And go ahead, Kelly, and let us know your analysis of that one.
Sure. This is a higher increase in the Denver health measure I just shared. This is a 0.5% sales increase, and it would generate $100 million in affordable housing for Denver. The city's already spent $75 million on affordable housing this year. So again, this would be an additional 100 million. It would start in 2025, so it would start next year. Again, our economic analyses does show tax increases lead to some job losses and GDP impacts. I think the other important item to note in our analysis is the proponents of this measure have said this would lead to 45,000 new housing units. When we've studied the amount of money that the city of Denver has been spending on affordable housing, we see that per unit cost to be much less than that. We think that if this measure did pass, we're looking at about half of those number of units. So what is that? About 23,000 units. So I think it's
Right.
something, for voters to understand. It's probably not going to generate the amount of housing that the city is proposing, but it would increase affordable housing in a city that by any measure is too expensive for the average
Right.
Colorado.
Yeah, and I mean, if again, I'm not a Denver resident, so I don't have a say in this, but I just taking those two sales tax in conjunction, if both were to pass, the reality is you're not just getting a 0.5% or a 0.3. If they pass together, you're going to be looking at like a 1% sales tax pretty much, and so you'll have to make a decision if those are priorities. So affordable housing, and then helping Denver Health cover their uncompensated costs. So I did find that very interesting that the proponents said that the tax will yield 45,000 units. I guess you could probably, when analyzing that, you could probably look at, well, they've already spent 75 million. So how many did they actually build from that 75 million? And then if they're saying they'll build X amount with 100 million, yeah, I certainly see that they need more affordable housing, so it'll be interesting. Okay, well, I've just got, let's see, we're at 23 minutes. I've got one more that I definitely want to cover because I only second to the hunting ban. I've probably heard the most about this, and again, I don't even live in Denver, but I've seen so much stuff about it, and it's the slaughterhouse. So the prohibition on slaughterhouses in Denver. So just your description of it from CSI. The initiative would prohibit the construction or use of slaughterhouses within Denver beginning in 2026. If passed, the prohibition would be the first of its kind in the United States. That was a tidbit that I hadn't heard before, but I'm excited to hear your analysis of this one.
Great. I appreciate it. And why it's important to listen to this, even if you don't live in Denver, because often we have an easy, accessible ballot statewide, but also in the city of Denver. So they test it out in Denver. So it could be coming to a city near you. So it's important to understand it. So currently, just as you said, this would primarily impact one slaughterhouse in Denver. We don't have a ton of slaughterhouses, as you can probably imagine. Superior Farms is the primary target of this measure. And when we do our economic analysis, it's fairly large. And that's because Superior Farm and Colorado at large is the nation's leading lamb and sheep processor. I didn't know
Hmm.
that. So I found that really
Yeah,
interesting.
right. I didn't know
Over
that
the
until I
last,
read your report. Yeah. Yeah.
I know. This is an ag state, and people forget that, especially in Denver
Right.
Metro. In 23 and 22, Colorado accounted for about 20% of the national lamb and sheep production in the country. So it's a big deal. And the economic impact here would be a loss of 760 million in 2026 if this slaughterhouse was shutting down. And the job losses we're seeing would be higher than
Mhm.
what has been estimated. We're estimating about 2,000 jobs in 2026. You might read Superior Farms only employs a few hundred people, but the reason our analysis shows 2,000 is we do a more dynamic and fuller analysis. And we saw that a lot of those jobs are along the supply chain. It's transportation, it's other services that the plant relies upon. So
Mhm.
65% of those job losses would actually be outside of the food processing industry. So just a reminder, whenever there is a measure, it's not just impacting the jobs and the economic output, maybe of the target, but the other surrounding industries that supply and support any large facility, especially something as complicated as a slaughterhouse that requires really multifaceted parts of our economy to support it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so something, a part of your analysis that I found interesting was that you all talk about net emissions. And it says net emissions from the measure are unlikely to decrease and may even increase from their current levels due to demolition of the existing slaughterhouse and construction of new facilities and longer shipping and trucking routes for goods. And that, I mean, I think that's a very important point, right? It's if you shut down the slaughterhouse, well, chances are Superior Farms, they will go and open somewhere else that's going to be further away than where they're currently at, if they even decide to stay in Colorado. And that's a reality too, right? If you got shut down, you may just leave for good, or just not open up anymore. But let's say that you opened up somewhere else in the state. Well, chances are you're going to be even further away and longer shipping. So that's more emissions coming from vehicles, because now they have to travel farther. They have to bring the animals there further, and then it's further to ship it. So I think that's a really important point. I don't know. I don't know the background on this particular measure, if this is being pushed by certain activist groups. I'd be curious to know. Is this an emissions thing, or is this an animal rights thing? Is the
You know,
justification for it?
I believe it's coming more from the animal rights side of things. I don't have the official organization in front of me right now,
Hmm.
but I think they want us to be vegetarians, Jarvis. I think
Okay.
they're,
Yeah.
they're starting with sheep and lamb, and then it would move to beef, et cetera. And I think why this really matters, even if you're
Hmm.
not here in Denver, it's to see the impacts in total, when you think about the slaughterhouse ban, when you think about this change to hunting, there's also a fur ban in Denver that
Hmm.
would restrict fur products like cowboy hats and boots and flies for your fly fishing.
Right.
There feels like a greater assault on the Western way of life. Assault's maybe a dramatic word, but there is an impact to the Western way of life. And that's, from my perspective, really seen in something like the National Western Stock Show, Common Sense. There's an
Right.
impact there, right? And the Common Sense Institute did a report earlier this year during the stock show, which was really fun. And we showed $170 million economic impact to the state for the stock show. And in
Right.
talking to their CEO and leadership, if measures like the slaughterhouse, fur ban, this big cat initiative, with the passage of so many measures that are really sending a message of being anti-agriculture, that stock
Hmm.
show could go to another state. A lot of those
Right.
vendors and bullfighters and all the things that we see and hold dear in Denver, and many restaurants and hotels and other consumers rely upon, could go elsewhere if the climate is seen as unattractive, or you couldn't even sell a cowboy hat or a cowboy boot. That stock show could go. So there's a huge economic implication when you really look at all of these ag related measures together in total.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the with the stock show, I mean, you have people who travel from all over the United States to go there. So, you know, how if you're flying in from across the country, to Denver, it's like, well, hey, now we're going to do it in Utah or something. So you're just going to have a little bit further flight. It's like
That's
like you
right.
said, it very well could be moved. And I read the fur ban one. I did not have it on my list, but I appreciate you covering it, only because that was something I didn't even take into consideration. And that's a very important point. So, Kelly, we're at 30 minutes, and I appreciate your time very much. I know you're very, very busy with everything going on, especially getting this close to November and all your ballot analysis that you guys are still working on as well. So we want to say thank you again. And your website for anyone who wants to go and read the report, and we'll make sure that we also link it as well so people can go straight to it.
Thank you, Jarvis. Brand new website, easier to read and digest, and you can sign up for text alert so you can never miss another report again from Common Sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.